First off, good morning, everybody. This is a great gig here in Fort Lauderdale. I think there are places you send people from TRADOC that they say, sir, can we cut down the size of the team? This team seemed to grow and grow and grow as we came down here. So it's great to be here with you this morning. What I want to talk about today is really some of the things we have going on at Training and Doctrine Command to shape the future. If you give me the agenda slide, please. I'm going to talk through a couple of things. First off is the operational environment. And I think we are not putting adequate emphasis on the operational environment and the challenges of the operational environment. And one of the arguments I'm going to make to you is that we talk often about a hybrid threat. And frankly, a number of folks have said that's kind of a bankrupt concept because it seems to be a bunch of sort of stitched together capabilities. We'll make an argument today that essentially it is a strategy, and it is a strategy used by nation states and surrogates to draw the United States in. And I'll talk to that in some detail, but that causes the way we think about things and the way we design our force. Secondly, I'm going to talk a little bit about operational adaptability, which has been our doctrine for the last, really since 2009, and I think in some ways we may have lost sight of who we are. And it's very important that we understand who we are as we design the force of the future. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about really 4 areas where TRADOC is trying to set conditions for these major transitions that are taking place that we're going to go through. And I hope to get through all of that and have time for your questions. Next slide. I think there are 3 components to a hybrid threat. And the first is a nation state or a proxy that has a range of capabilities. And again, the range of capabilities I would talk about is everything that has worked against us for the last 10 years and seemed to have some modicum of success, we will continue to see into the future. I think the other point is a desire to preclude the United States from executing its way of war. And again, our way of war in terms of how we would choose to execute a conflict to take us off our game at in any juncture. And then finally, a strategic lever that would force us to continue to have to commit to the fight when we realize it is not in our interest. And I'll talk about how that comes together here in a moment. Again, I think these forces recognize that conventional confrontation with the U.S. Is in fact a losing proposition, that they understand our vulnerabilities, they are on their home terrain, and again, they will use the non-traditional capabilities to the maximum extent possible, not in a random way, but in a designed way to address U.S. vulnerabilities. The end state is really to frustrate U.S. operations, ensure survival of key capabilities, and turn conflict into protracted war of attrition, which then again goes back at one of our potential strategic vulnerabilities, which would be national will. I think this set of gears here on the right-hand side depicts, I think many people don't understand the issue of proxies and strategic capabilities and the fact that all of these are leveraged together when we talk about the capability of potential hybrid threats in the future. Next slide. When we put this together, again, on the right-hand side are the list of likely threats that we're about to see in the future, anti-access among them. But what we've done here is sort of taken a chart and laid down what we see, the current joint operational access concept, the value of air-sea battle against the problem, the value of gaining and maintaining access. And the point I would make here is I think it probably gives you a context of the real value of something like air-sea battle that will fundamentally address the problem of anti-access. But what does it do to address the hybrid threat? And if you go back to understanding a strategic lever, something that will force us to have to stay in the game. And you could think about, potentially Iran, you could think about Syria, you could think about Hezbollah, you could think about any number of actors that might be capable of throwing something, a strategic lever like a loose nuke or something of that nature that would cause us to have to continue to stay in the fight and again come out of this not meeting our overall objectives. And I think our problem is focusing on how do we defeat the hybrid threat, not just gaining access and maintaining access. I think the chairman is working on that. I think he's gone back to the Joint Staff. I think they're addressing this in a broader sense. But the real issue for us in terms of winning is how we address these hybrid threats. Next slide. Another optic I'd like to talk about is the challenge of force structuring today versus the challenge of the past. And I'd start off by saying on the left-hand side of this chart, and it's fascinating, I got this actually from a young SAMS major who I think was from AUSA, who was at one of our planning conferences, and basically said, sir, here's the problem that you're talking about. So I give him credit for this slide, but fundamentally it talks about the past where we could focus centrally on the threat, the hybrid threat, a well-defined threat in our planning efforts, and then we could force size appropriately to deal with that. If you look at the current defense planning guidance or defense strategy, what you realize is the Army has in fact been given 10 missions and told to force size against 4 of those missions. So the challenge that you have is, again, the issue of addressing that hybrid threat in the center of the right-hand side, and then the other 3 missions that we're authorized to force size against, but 6 other missions that we have to address. So the challenge that you face is how do you do that with a force of 490,000? How do you allocate forces to achieve all of those missions? And the problem comes in when people start talking about specialization. And there's a lot of discussion about organizations that we would build that would address fundamentally each of these 10 different missions. And I think we at TRADOC, again, in our recommendation to the chief, very much resist that. And I think, if you go to the next slide, the essence of what the United States Army does is winning. The essence of what we do, I mean, you can talk about prevent, shape, and win, but the reality of it is that you have to have sufficient forces that you're capable of winning against that hybrid threat. I think I've talked about where our focus is right now may not, in fact, be on that hybrid threat. And we are, in fact, I think, keeping our eye on the ball as it pertains to having adequate forces to achieve that. The Army of 2020, as the chief describes it, he'll be here tomorrow, and he'll go into some detail about the tenets above. But I think this is, the point I'm making here is best represented by, I had the chief of the Australian Army visiting me, David Morrison, and we were talking about shaping, and we were talking about the Pacific and the Army's role. And the point he made to me is the only reason that you're capable of being effective at prevention and shaping is because we know you're an Army that is capable of winning. And so there's an interaction between really our capability to prevent, our ability to shape, and then our ability, in fact, to win. If you go to the next slide, I think the issue of adaptability comes into play, and the argument of how do we achieve adaptability. I would argue if you want something done in the United States Army, the people you turn to are our talented company, battalion, brigade, and division commanders. That in fact the desire to build tailor-made organizations to achieve specific purposes has never been the way that we have been successful. And I would lay that out here on this axis. If you look at really the last 10 years and you look at the things that we have accomplished with those organizations, that is where our intellectual capital, that is where our energy, that is where our enthusiasm exists. And so the argument essentially to build as many flexible, adaptable brigades as we can, and then use those and tailor them down once the mission set is known, is really the approach that we at TRADOC are advocating for the future. Next slide, please.